Good morning, second year students. Today we are going to do an essay by E.M. Foster, and the name of the essay is My Wood. So, if I speak these two words in front of you, my wood, what thoughts come into your mind? You will say that wood is a jungle, is a piece of land, and the name wood itself suggests that it is a place or it is a piece of land which is not well developed or well cultivated. It is a rough forest sort of land. And this possessive pronoun my suggests that he is talking of his wood, means the possession of the wood, the piece of land by the essayist. So, the essayist says that a few years ago I wrote a book which dealt in part with the difficulties of the English in India. Feeling that they would have no difficulty in India themselves, the Americans read the book freely. Now, which book he is talking about? He is talking about the book A Passage to India. Remember, E.M. Foster has written this book, A Passage to India, and it is a very popular book. The more they read it, the better it made them feel, and a check to the author was the result. Now, the summary of these lines is that the author, he received a check in return of his novel. So, the copies of his novel sold a lot and he got a handsome check in his hand. So, I bought a wood with the check. It is not a large wood. It contains scarcely any trees and it is intersected, blasted by a public footpath. Now, the author got a check in return of the sale of his novels, and what did he do with the check? He bought a he bought a wood with this check. And he says that it is not a large wood. Wood means a piece of land. A piece of land. So, and the description of that land is that it does not have much trees, and notice the use of the word blasted. Blasted means he does not want it. He does not like it, curse it. So, it is intersected by a public footpath. So, there is a wood and there is a public footpath right in between that piece of land. And this fact is not liked by the possessor, by the author. It is naturally a fact that nobody will like that there should be a public footpath in between his land. So, still it is the first property that I have owned. So, it is right that the other people should participate in my shame and should ask themselves in accents that will vary in horror this very important question: what is the effect of property upon character? Now he says that this is my first property. This is the first property which I have ever possessed in my life. So he says that other people who possess properties should also participate in my shame. Now notice the use of the word shame. He says that it gave me shame. Now there is a question in our mind that why should a piece of land put him to shame? So he says other people, other holders, other possessors of property should also participate in my shame, and they should also ask themselves. So one question they should ask, what should be that question? What is the effect of property upon character? Now, he says that the theme of this essay is the effect of property on character. Don't let us touch economics. He says that I'm not talking of economics, I'm not talking of financial effects of property. What could be the financial effects of property? That if you buy a piece of land, you may sell it in double rate and you may have economic gains. But he says that I'm not talking of economic gains. The effect of private ownership upon community as whole is another question. He says, I'm not talking of the question or the relationship of community ownership and private ownership. A more important question, perhaps, but another one. He says, I have another question in my mind which I am going to ask myself. Let us keep to psychology. So he is trying to keep the psychological aspect of having a property. So he says, what effect of property is there on a person's psychology? He is not talking of economics, he is not talking of financial effects, but he is talking of the psychological effect of a property on the owner. Now he says, if you own things, means if you have things, if you are the owner of many things or property, what is their effect on you? What is the effect of me, on me, of my wood? So he says, here personally, I will talk of my wood. I will talk of the effect of my property. And what is my property? My little piece of land which I got in return of my book. So the question will be, what is the effect on me of my wood, of my property? So he gives a lot of effects of property, and the very first effect he says is, in the first place, it makes me feel heavy. Property does have this effect. Now, where is the heaviness? The heaviness is in the mind. He says it makes me feel heavy. So, psychologically he feels heavy because property produces men of weight. Now, here is a touch of humor, and there is a reference to the Bible also, where in Bible it is said that it was a man of weight who failed to get into the kingdom of heaven. Now, it is a fable that a man with heavy weight failed to enter the gates of heaven, and a camel instead it was able to cross the gates of heaven. He was not wicked. He says that the man who failed to enter the gates of heaven was not wicked, but he was unfortunate millionaire. He was a millionaire. He had a lot of money. He was rich person. He was only stout. Stout means he was a fat person. He stuck out in front, not to mention behind. As he wedged himself this way and that, the crystalline entrance and bruised his well-fed flanks. Now you see, his body was bruised because he was struggling to go inside the doors of heaven. So here also we have touch of humor. He says we can imagine that a fat person is he is struggling to enter the gates of heaven, and he could not succeed, but he had a lot of wounds or bruises in his body, on his body. He saw beneath him comparatively slim camel. Now you see, the camel was slim, passing through the eye of a needle and being woven into the robe of God. Robe means cloth. So he compared that he, a fat man, could not enter the gates of heaven, but he saw that a camel was able to enter the gates of heaven from the eye of a needle. So the Gospels all through couple stoutness and slowness. Now he says that stoutness and slowness go hand in hand. If you are stout, you are slow. And it is a well-proven fact that slim people can run faster, and the stout or fat people, they can't even walk fast. So they point out what is perfectly obvious yet seldom realized. Now he says that these Gospels and these parables, these stories tell us that these facts are true, that stout people are slow. So, what does he want to explain us? He says that property makes you feel heavy. Now, how can a property make you feel heavy? The answer is that if you have a lot of property, there will be a heaviness in your heart. There will be a heaviness in your mind. And if you have a lot of things, you can't move about a lot. That furniture requires dusting, dusters require servants, servants require insurance stamps, and the whole tangle of them makes you think twice before you accept an invitation to dinner or go for a bath in Jordan. Now he says that if you have a lot of property, you can't move about easily. It is also said when you go for a journey, your luggage should be light. Why? If your luggage is light, you will be able to move across very easily. Now he gives us an example that if you have a lot of properties in your house, you can't leave those things very easily and go on a foreign tour. And it is a chain and it is a cycle created one after another. If you have a lot of furniture, then the furniture requires dusting, it needs maintenance, and in order to maintain the furniture, you need to keep servants, and servants need insurance stamps, they need salary, they need a room to stay in, and the whole tangle of them makes you think twice before you accept an invitation. Means you have to think a lot of times before you leave your property and go somewhere else for a few days. So property makes you feel heavy. Sometimes the gospel proceed further and says with Tolstoy that property is sinful. They approach the difficult ground of asceticism here where I can't follow them. He says that Leo Tolstoy has also said that property is sinful. Yes, we sometimes see that men are murdered for property. But he says that I'm not talking of that thing, but as to the immediate effects of property on people. He says that I'm talking of the ready effects of property on people. They just show straightforward logic. It produces men of weight. So the very first negative effect of property is that they produce men of weight. Men of weight cannot, by definition, move like lightning from east to west. And the ascent of 14-stone bishop into a pulpit is that exact antithesis of coming of the Son of Man. My wood makes me feel heavy. Now the bishop who is standing in the pulpit is a place from where the bishop addresses the common people. He also says that property makes you feel heavy. So the very first effect of property is that property makes me feel heavy. So here also he says that my wood, my only property, is making me feel heavy. Now the second effect of property says that it makes me feel it ought to be larger. Now greed. The feeling of greed enters when you have a small property. You begin to think that it ought to be larger and larger and larger, that it should grow. So again, there is a disturbance in your mind due to property. So now he explains the point that how property makes you feel that it ought to be larger. The other day I heard a twig snap in it. I was annoyed at first, for I thought that someone was blackberrying and depreciating the value of undergrowth. Now he says that one fine day I heard a little sound, and what was that sound? A twig snap. So he was annoyed at first because he thought that that wood is intersected with the public path, so he thought that some people might be plucking fruit from his wood and they must be depreciating the value of undergrowth. Now you see, again, humor has entered because there is not a very fine lawn grown on it, but the undergrowth, rough grass is growing on. But even that he does not want, that it should be destroyed by the bypassers. On coming nearer, I saw it was not a man who has trodden on the twig and snapped it, but a bird. I felt pleased. So when he went nearer, he noticed that there was not a man who was trying to steal blackberries, but it was a bird. Now you see, my bird. As soon as the bird came into his wood, he thought that he possessed the bird. So he says, my bird, because it is chirping into my wood. The bird was not equally pleased. Now he says that I was pleased, but the bird was not equally pleased. Ignoring the relation between us, it took fright as soon as it saw the shape of my face, and flew straight over the boundary hedge into the field, the property of Mrs. Hennessy, where it sat down with a loud squawk. It had become Mrs. Hennessy's bird. Now what happened, that the bird came into his wood, he became pleased, but the bird was frightened looking at the author, and it took flight, and it went and sat into the wood of the neighbor. And who's the neighbor? The neighbor is Mrs. Hennessy. So the bird flew into the next door neighbor's property, that is Mrs. Hennessy's property. Now in one moment it was the author's bird, and now another moment it has become Mrs. Hennessy's bird. Now this event forced him to think that his property should have been larger, so that the bird would have sat in his property only. So something seemed grossly amiss here, something that would not have occurred had the wood been larger. Now he says that this thing would not have occurred. Now what had occurred? That a moment ago the bird was mine, and a moment after the bird was Mrs. Hennessy. So this thing could not have occurred if my wood have been larger, if Mrs. Hennessy's wood was also mine. Now you see how the property is having effect of greed on the mind of the possessor. Now you see what he has started thinking. I could not afford to buy Mrs. Hennessy out. So he says that I am not rich enough to buy out Mrs. Hennessy's wood. I dared not murder her. You see to what depth he is going, to what heights he is going, that he says the thought of murder has also entered into his mind. He says, I dared not murder it, but it is just a thought. He is not doing so. But at least the thought entered that in order to acquire Mrs. Hennessy's wood, first, I cannot buy it. Secondly, I can't murder her. And the limitations of this sort beset me every side. Ahab did not want that vineyard. He only needed it to round off his property, preparatory to plotting a new curve. And all the land around my wood has become necessary to me in order to round off my wood. Again, he is referring to the Bible. He says that Ahab only did not want that vineyard, but he wanted to round off his property. He wanted to include some more property into his existing property. Now he says, even I want to do the same. I want to round off my property, means I want to increase my property from all corners. So he says that all the land around my wood has become my necessary. Now he says that all the land which is covering my wood, which is neighboring my wood, I need to have that property. So this thought of increasing his property has entered into the thoughts of the author. A boundary protects. Now he says that I need to build a boundary around it, but poor little thing, the boundary ought in turn to be protected. Now he says a boundary protects the plot, but the boundary also need protection. Noises on the edge of it. Now you see, one thought is giving rise to another thought. He says, first of all, he says that I need to increase it, and then I need a boundary, and then he says the boundary also needs to protection. Noises on the edge of it. But he says that if I will build a boundary, then there will be noises on the edge of it. Children throw stones in order to have fruit, a little more and then little more until we reach the sea. Now he says, I want to increase my property a little more and a little more, and there is no limit to greed. So he says, I want my property to reach the sea. Means I want the whole earth to become my sea. Happy Canute, happier Alexander. Because Alexander won the whole world, so that is why he was happier. So he says, if I have the whole world as my property, I will be happier. And after all, why should even the world be the limit of possession? A rock containing the Union Jack will, it is hoped, be shortly fired on the moon. Now he is talking of those times when astronauts did not reach moons. So he says, why only I should possess the earth? So he says, in near future, he thought then that in near future, man will have property on moon also. So I want my property on moon also. Mars, Sirius, beyond which. Now he says, you see, he is trying to have the property of the whole universe. But these immensities ended by saddening me. So, as he thought, so he became saddened. Now, why did he become sad? Because he knew that these were only daydreamings and he could not acquire the neighbor's property or the whole property of the earth or a property on the moon. I could not suppose that my wood was the destined nucleus of the universal dominion. It is so very small that contains no mineral wealth beyond blackberries. Now he is also thinking that my wood is very small and it does not have any mineral wealth, but it has only blackberries. Nor was I comforted when Mrs. Hennessey's bird took alarm for the second time and flew clean away from us under the belief that it belonged to itself. Now, the bird which was sitting a moment ago in his wood, the next moment it flew and sat on the wood of Mrs. Hennessey, and the third moment it was flying in the air as if it wanted to say that I belong to myself. I am neither yours nor Mrs. Hennessey's. So the first two effects of property were, the first was that it makes you feel heavy, the second that it makes you feel that it ought to be larger. Now the third property of property is that in the third place, property makes its owner feel that he ought to do something of it. If we have a piece of land, we start thinking. Some people will think that I will do farming on it. Some person will think that I will build a school on it. Another person will say that I will build a hotel on it. Another person will say that no, I will build a farmhouse from it. So when you have a property, we start thinking that we ought to do something of it. Means you can't sit at peace. There is always something going into your mind about that property. Yet he isn't sure what. The possessor of the property thinks that he wants to do something of this property, but he is not sure that what does he want to do. A restlessness comes over him. A vague sense that he has a personality to express. We think that all the rich people are very happy, but it is not so. There is a restlessness in their mind. Why? Because they want to do something of their property. They want to do something out of their money. So this continuous thinking gives them restlessness. So he says, a vague sense. Vague means unclear, not clear. sense that he has a personality to express. Now, how will a possessor of property express his personality? By doing something of it. An intellectual person will think that I want to build a library in it. A person interested in farming will make it a field. A person who is interested in social service will make a charity hospital on it. So everybody has a personality to express. The same sense which, without any vagueness, leads the artist to act of creation. He says that he gives a comparison that as an artist think that I need to create a poem, I need to create a music, or I need to paint a painting. In the same way, the possessor of a property thinks that I want to do something out of this property. So sometimes I think I will cut down such trees as remain in the wood. Now you see, a lot of thoughts are coming into his mind. At one point he thinks that I will cut all the trees that are growing in my wood, and another time he thinks that I will grow more trees in my wood. So both impulses are pretentious and empty. They are not honest movements towards money making or beauty. So he says, I don't want to make money, or I don't want to beautify my wood, but they spring from a foolish desire to express myself, from an inability to enjoy what I have got. He says, I don't enjoy what I have got, I just want to make it better. Or I want to express my personality by changing its feature. Creation, property, enjoyment form a sinister trinity in the human mind. Says that it is a very sinister, negative sort of trinity. Creation, property and enjoyment. So I hope you understood this lesson. So this is half of the essay. Tomorrow we will continue with another part of the essay. So today we did that property has three negative effects on personality. The first effect is that it ought to be larger. It makes men of heavyweight. Makes you feel heavier. Secondly, that it makes you feel that it ought to be larger. And thirdly, that the owner of the property thinks that he ought to do something of it. Thank you.